I've listened to a couple of your videos before sending this over. There were two stories in particular you did recently that are very similar to what happened to me almost 27 years ago. My name is Eric Ryback. My main career is in real estate, but in my spare time, I'm a paranormal investigator. Let me tell you the story of how this all began for me. It was the winter of 1999. I was in my first year of college, and I was about 3 months into my first serious relationship. We'll call her Samantha. By the time winter break came around, things were going great. Samantha found this authentic rental cabin way off the grid in the backwoods of West Virginia. We both needed to get away from the academic grind and just enjoy a weekend of peace, quiet, and intercourse. The cabin was exactly how you would expect. Wooden exterior, wood stove, porch overlooking nothing but trees. The nearest neighbor was miles away and out of sight. The owner met us at the end of a long dirt driveway. He was a quiet, weathered guy who barely spoke to us. He handed over the key and said, "I wouldn't go wandering around after dark. Nearest phone is at the ranger station about 20 miles from here. There's a map on the coffee table." He then left in his truck. These were different times. In 1999, cell phones were around, but I didn't own one. Samantha brought hers along, but had no signal. The first night went off without a hitch. We cooked on the fire pit out back, drank some cheap wine, and enjoyed each other's company. The woods were dead silent, except for the occasional owl, and the cicadas doing their thing. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to what I thought was Samantha whispering. When I rolled over, she was sound asleep. I figured it was just a dream and went back to sleep. The next day we went hiking. The air felt a bit heavier the deeper we went. Samantha kept stopping and looking behind us, like she had heard something following us. I didn't hear anything myself, but by the time we got back to the cabin, I had that skin-crawling feeling you get when someone's watching you from somewhere unseen. That night, the chanting started. I would say it was around 8 p.m. when we first heard faint chanting coming from somewhere in the trees. Rhythmic, low voices, rising and falling. Samantha wanted to go outside with a flashlight, and I talked her out of it. We locked all the doors, kept the lights on, and eventually, it stopped. In the morning, we convinced ourselves it was some nearby campers or local weirdos fucking around. Fast forward to dusk of that day. I was on the porch when I saw it. Between the trees, maybe 50 yards out. A tall figure, maybe 6'5", with what looked like antlers or horns curving up from its head. It was just standing there, facing the cabin. I called to Samantha to see if she could see it as well, but by the time she came out, it was gone. She thought I was messing with her. The next morning, I saw it again, closer this time, standing motionless, watching the cabin. This time Samantha saw it too. We both froze in place. It clearly wasn't a person. It wasn't shifting its weight around. It didn't even look like it was breathing. It was just there. Then it stepped sideways behind a thick pine and vanished. We spent the rest of that day completely paranoid. We stayed inside, with the doors bolted. The chanting came back that night, much louder this time. It sounded like it was circling the cabin. We were both mortified. Samantha kept saying that she felt like something was in the room with us, like a pressure on her chest. I felt it as well. Suddenly, All the cabinet doors in the kitchen opened at once. We tried to leave, but as soon as we stepped outside, we saw several hooded figures in the forest surrounding the cabin. There were even more blocking us from getting back to our car, holding what looked like axes and machetes. We had no choice but to retreat back into the cabin. Samantha frantically tried to get a signal, but it was no use. We were trapped inside. After hours of panicking and looking out the window every 5 seconds, we eventually huddled up next to each other and passed out from exhaustion. I woke up to Samantha standing over me. When I asked her what was going on, she said, "I'm sorry, Eric, but I have to do this." She didn't seem to be possessed. She spoke very calmly. Do what? What must be done? I really do like you, but I have to prove myself. What the fuck are you talking about, Samantha? Without another word, Samantha charged at me with a knife. I stopped the attack, with the blade mere inches from my chest. She meant business. I pushed her off me, sending her backward into a bookshelf. Samantha, what the fuck is the matter with you? You almost killed me. She got back to her feet. Just die, Eric. She came at me again, the knife swinging wildly, catching my right forearm as I blocked it. I had to act quickly, otherwise Samantha would do more damage with that knife. I grabbed her wrist with my left hand and wrenched the knife from her with my right hand. Once it was on the floor, Samantha resorted to trying to scratch my face, going for the eyes. I pushed her off me, sending her against the wall. She was knocked unconscious and slid down. I grabbed my car keys and ran. The hooded figures were still outside, standing perfectly still in the trees, forming a loose ring around the cabin. They didn't chase me, and they were no longer blocking me from getting back to my car. To my surprise, the engine turned over immediately, and I drove out of there like a maniac. I remember looking in the rearview mirror to see that horned figure standing beside the road. It appeared to be trying to catch my car. As I left it behind, I heard a loud shriek over the engine. I kept driving until I got to that ranger station. I was shaking so bad, I could barely hold the wheel steady. They called in a sheriff's deputy who took my report, but I could tell they all thought I was on drugs. When I mentioned the rental site and the cabin's location, they got weird and said that they would be sending units out right away. Samantha was the one who rented the cabin, so I didn't know any details about the rental listing. But the owner of that cabin, who all the rangers and deputies knew personally, lived out of state and never listed it as a rental. I was then informed about a week later that Samantha had registered for classes using a stolen identity. Samantha wasn't even her name. In fact, they never found out who she really was. I never heard from her again. I've had a lot of time to reflect on the events of that night. I think Samantha was a part of a cult that worshipped demons. Our entire relationship was a ruse to lure me out to that cabin, so she could sacrifice me. Back then, I didn't have experience with paranormal events like I do now, but based on what I remember and what I felt, I believe that thing I saw in the forest was a demonic entity. My fascination with demonology stems from both my family history and my military service. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan from 2018 to 2020. I was an Army specialist, working in logistics mostly. I never saw anything supernatural over there, but I heard the stories from some of the locals. Those have stuck with me. Afghanistan is known as the graveyard of empires. Many wars were fought on that land long before the War on Terror began. Its past, present, and future are defined by turmoil, the perfect place for demonic activity. My father, Viktor Petrov, set foot on this land years before I was even born, a young conscript from a nowhere village outside of Volgograd. He rarely spoke about it when I was a kid growing up, but one night in 2019, during my mid-tour leave, we sat in the garage. The Afghanistan deployment had loosened something in him. He immigrated to the US in the mid-90s, and I guess he thought it was a bit ironic that both he and his son would fight a war in Afghanistan for two different countries. This is what he told me. The year was 1981. The Mujahideen were ghosts, slipping through the mountains, striking supply lines, then vanishing into villages that swore they were innocent. His platoon had been attached to a tank column that rolled into a small village near the Panjshir Valley. The orders were simple: level anything that might be hiding the freedom fighters. The tanks turned the village into dust. Killing many innocent Afghans in the process. Soviet command then sent a few ground troops to sweep for intelligence, maps, weapon caches, anything at all. My father said he was very thirsty, and his canteen was completely empty, so he was also looking for water as well. Near the edge of what had been a large house, collapsed under tank fire, he spotted a wooden trapdoor in the dirt, partially hidden by the debris. It looked like a root cellar. He pried it open and climbed down the ladder into the dark hole. The smell hit first, rot, like spoiled meat. His flashlight beam revealed shelves of jars, sacks of grain, the usual village storage you would expect. Then, in the far corner, where the light could barely reach, something moved. My father raised his rifle and shouted at whoever it was to come out. Something did step out. It was a figure shaped like a man, but its skin looked like charred leather stretched too tightly. Behind it was what looked like a tail. It didn't charge at him. It just watched him with eyes that reflected the light. He scrambled back up the ladder so fast he nearly broke his ankle. He sealed the wooden door with a fallen beam and ran to rejoin the others. Once he arrived back at his platoon, he reported that he had found nothing. Nothing at all. His platoon loaded onto a transport and pulled out as the sun began to set. He was sitting near the rear hatch of the vehicle, watching the ruined village recede. That's when he saw the villagers. Their bodies were broken and bloodied. Some were missing limbs, and their clothing hung off them in shreds. They stood among the rubble, perfectly still, their faces turned toward the convoy, just watching them. My father seemed to be the only one who saw them, because when the platoon sergeant asked him what he was staring at, he looked back and saw nothing. He never told anyone in his unit. Who would believe a young conscript seeing ghosts after a massacre? During my own employments, I have lied awake in my bunk, thinking about my father's story, about the thing he described with the tail, and the dead villagers watching him. After my own service came to an end, I began studying demonology and the stories of the Islamic jinn from the region. I can read and speak Russian fluently, so I was able to get my hands on some Soviet-era reports of anomalies that got buried in the archives. The accounts from Afghanistan, both Soviet and American, have patterns, shadowy figures in caves. There was a story featured on your channel about a US soldier who got separated from his unit and encountered one of these beings behind a locked door in a dark cave. I think to most listening it sounds completely made up. Personally, I believe every word. I must admit that during my own time in the war, I never saw one myself, but sometimes on those long drives between bases, I would catch a movement in the mountains, silhouettes on the ridgeline that disappeared when I blinked. I think these entities are only the tip of the iceberg. Religion and politics aside, I believe something lurks beneath the sands of Afghanistan. A gateway to hell, not a metaphorical one, a physical one. Perhaps it was created by the constant wars that have taken place there, or maybe it has always been there, from the very beginning. I grew up in a little town in the panhandle of Florida called Shady Grove. It's a small community where everyone knew everyone, and nothing much ever happened there. At least, that's how it was until 1981. I was 5 years old. My parents were going out for a dinner date at this fancy restaurant in Tallahassee, so they hired a babysitter to watch me. Her name was Christine. She seemed quiet, a little awkward, but harmless enough. Plus, she had good recommendations. As soon as my parents left that night, the house felt different. Christine didn't play with me. She didn't even speak. She just sat on the couch in the living room, staring at the wall like she was listening to something that only she could hear. I tried everything a lonely 5-year-old could think of, showing her my dolls, asking if she wanted some juice, tugging on her sleeve. Nothing. Finally, I climbed onto the couch beside her and asked, "Hey, are you okay?" Her head then snapped toward me so fast, I jumped. Her eyes looked unnatural, cloudy, unfocused, like they didn't belong to her. The voice that came out of her mouth wasn't hers. It was deep, guttural, and hateful.
"Shut up or I'll pull out your insides, you little bitch."
I screamed and ran straight to my bedroom, slamming the door, and hiding under the covers. I stayed there for what felt like forever, my heart hammering inside my tiny chest, praying my parents would come back soon. After an hour or so, my throat got very dry. The house was completely silent. I crept out, made my way to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water with shaking hands. There was no sign of Christine. The living room couch was empty. Relief washed over me as I turned to head back to my room. When I entered the hallway, there was something standing at the far end, near my bedroom door. It was a tall figure, with horns curled upward from its head like a ram. Its skin was leathery and dark. A red pair of eyes stared at me. A low sound, like breathing through punctured lungs, came from its direction. I dropped my glass and bolted for the front door, screaming my lungs out, then ran barefoot across the yard to our neighbor's house. 80-year-old Miss Brooks took me in, confused and worried when she saw how scared I was. She called my parents at the restaurant, who came rushing back home. When they got there, Christine was gone. There was no note, no explanation. She had simply vanished. My parents searched the house from top to bottom. Nothing. As far as I know, my parents never contacted the police. Christine was never heard from again. For years, I tried to bury that memory, but the nightmares I had kept it alive. I kept telling myself it was a child's overactive imagination, that the voice was just a mean teenager trying to scare me. That figure in the hallway was a trick of the light, but I knew I was just lying to myself. Many years later, when I was in my 30s, I was flipping through channels one night and landed on Investigation Discovery. The episode was called something like The Babysitter from Hell. They were profiling a woman named Christine Falling. When they showed a photo of her when she was younger, I almost had a panic attack right there on my couch. My hands went numb. The woman that they were showing, it was her. The same woman who came to our house in 1981. The same one who shouted at me in that impossible voice. I sat there, frozen, as the narrator detailed her crimes. Between 1980 and 1982, Christine Falling, a teenager from Perry, Florida, 12 miles from Shady Grove, had been hired to babysit multiple children in the area. Several of them died under her care. She would eventually confess to killing at least some of the children, telling investigators she heard voices commanding her to kill them. She was dubbed the Killer Babysitter and was sentenced to life in prison. I never told my parents the full truth. They wouldn't have believed me anyway, but I know what I saw. Deep in my bones, I know that what I encountered that night wasn't just Christine. I know that she was telling the truth when she said that she heard voices. Something evil was inside of her. Maybe she was trying to fight it off, and that's why she left our house that night. And that's why I'm still alive. But in the end, it seems she lost that battle, and it consumed her.